All right, welcome to our content video for Genesis chapter 29. We see that after Jacob's encounter with God, he continues to the land of the eastern peoples. That is where um, Abraham's brother had settled. There, in a way reminiscent of how the servant had found a wife for his father, he comes to a well. This may, in fact, have been the very same well that the servant had met his mother Rebekah. Jacob sees some shepherds there and is asking about his uncle Laban. And fortuitously, just as he asks about him, not only does he get a positive answer that Laban is well, but um, Rachel, Laban's daughter, shows up and they point her out to him. Now, everyone was kind of waiting around until enough shepherds had showed up so that they could roll this large stone that was sitting in the mouth of the well. Um, but when Jacob saw Rachel, he rolled the stone away himself. Now, the impression is that Jacob here is showing off. He came and kissed Rachel and then wept aloud um, as God had made him successful in his task in finding Laban's family and very likely in his own mind, his future wife as well. He could kiss her in public because she was his relative, maybe even his sister, kind of referring back to the narratives involving Abraham and Isaac and their sisters. That's just, I'm not sure if that's the case, but there is some similarity there. Her response was also the same as Rebekah's, Jacob's mother, and her response that had been earlier is, and that she runs back to inform Laban. And his response um, was that he was his own flesh and blood. He's excited to be reunited with him. And so Jacob stays with the family for a month before any discussion of wages are discussed. So he's been helping Laban with his flocks. And so finally, after 30 days, Laban says, what would you like for payment? Now, just remember, there's good reason why Jacob wouldn't have demanded pay. He was on the run and he needed a place to stay, so it was quite convenient for him. But no doubt he knew what he wanted, and he wanted Rachel's hand in marriage. So Jacob offered to work for Laban for 7 years in order to uh, marry Rachel. Laban agrees with these terms, and Jacob works for 7 years in anticipation of being able to marry. It says it goes by in a short time, which is the same expression that his mother had told Jacob that in a short time, when Esau's anger had gone down, then he could return home. So it's kind of a little reminder of that phrase. But 7 years has passed. And so there's a great wedding celebration. And when Jacob goes into his tent uh, to have his wedding night, he wakes up in the morning to a big surprise. And that is that he has spent the night not with Rachel, but with Leah. And in a case of very profound poetic justice, just as the younger had usurped the older in getting the birthright, now the older uh, daughter usurps the younger in becoming Jacob's wife. And so when Jacob protests to Laban, he really has nothing to say. Laban says that's not our custom, and so he says, "Well, you can have Rachel as well if you work another 7 years." And so he uh, he works. He spends the bridal week with Leah, and then after that, he gets Rachel as well, and but he has to work another 7 years. So he's got to stick around another 7 years in order for that to take place. And we are told that he loved Rachel more than Leah. Some translations actually say he hated Leah. I'm not sure that's. I wasn't able to dig further on that. Uh, he didn't actually hate Leah, but he certainly preferred her. Rachel was, as we are told, uh, lively in her eyes and beautiful in form, where Leah had weak eyes. And so the impression is that Rachel was more attractive than Leah. Um, but as we look at the next section of Genesis 29, um, beginning in verse 29, we see that God doesn't look at things the same way. And so Jacob, God sees that Jacob has kind of forsaken Leah. He's not giving her much attention. And so as a result, he opens up her womb so that she can have children. And so the first three children that Leah has are all named in reference to, oh, now my husband's going to like me. So the first one is Reuben, which is a play on the word Ben, which is the word for son, but also similar to the word for struggle. So God has seen my struggle and rewarded me with a son. And now my husband's going to love me. And then Simeon is a play on the Lord heard I am not loved, and Levi is my husband will become attached to me, and so we see that in each instance her hope is that her husband would be drawn to her. Now, when her fourth son is born, she does not name him in reference to her husband, but rather says Judah, which is a play on I will praise the Lord. And so Judah will play quite prominently later on in Genesis. And so at this point, Leah stops having children for a time. Now Rachel sees Leah having children, is jealous, and demands that Jacob give her a child. He rightly says that that is beyond his power. So, like Jacob's grandmother Sarah, she takes matters into her own hands and gets Jacob to marry Bilhah so she can establish a family through her. Note that whereas Leah refers to the Lord, Rachel makes no mention of him at this point. It is only after Bilhah has a son that God is mentioned, and that son is Dan. And that means God has vindicated me. Very much seen as a struggle between these two sisters, which is working out to fulfill the promise of many children. So then Bilhah has another son named Naphtali, and that is, I have wrestled. In other words, Rachel's wrestling with Leah and is winning. Then, when Leah sees this happening and realizes she's no longer having children, she follows Rachel's strategy and gives her servant Zilpah to Jacob as a wife. She in turn bears a son that Leah calls Gad, sorry. Good fortune has come. And again, it's in reference to this battle going on. And then another whom she is called Asher. Women will call me happy. Notice that it's the two primary wives that are naming these children. The other two are really just kind of pawns in this game. Next, we hear this story that Reuben has found some mandrakes and brought them back to Leah, his mother. Mandrakes are kind of a creepy looking root that often resembles a man or sometimes a woman. And so they were thought to be aphrodisiacs / fertility enhancers. Whether that plays into the story or not, I don't know. Maybe Rachel thought that this would help her have a child. I'm not sure. But either way, Rachel asks for some from Leah, and Leah's none too happy about it and says, man, you're taking my wife, now you want my mandrakes? Anyway, she makes a deal with him and says, well, if I'll give you some of my mandrakes if you let me go into Jacob tonight. Uh, Very strange, but the result is, and again, let's kind of go back to similarities. This is kind of harkening back to the example of when Jacob tricked the birthright out of Esau because he was hungry. Well, both of them involve food, and anyway, that's an interesting connection. This allowed Leah to become pregnant again, and this time she named it Ishkar, rewarded me to my husband, uh, thinking, continuing to hope that Jacob would notice her, and also that she had earned this son by selling her mandrakes. Finally, she had a sixth son named Zebulun, meaning present with honor. We are told that sometime later she had a daughter named Dinah, and while the meaning of her name is not given, she is brought up because she will play a significant part of the story of the family later. It's presumed that in addition to these sons, there were other daughters as well, but those aren't mentioned. Finally, eh, Rachel has a son of her own after God remembers her, and she calls him Joseph. God has taken away my disgrace. He will also come to dominate the narratives in time, and um, this marks the end of the discussion of the children, the sons born to Israel, but there is one more to come, and that will be Benjamin. But um, this ends this section of Jacob and his wives.